What's happening, guys? Today we're going to have a look at using Gmail API using Python to extract either the message subject or the message body, whatever it is that you can do in Gmail automatically just to maybe do some operations on those emails or the content in the emails. Personally, I use this to, grab the emails that we get from a bunch of news sources and do some NLP, natural language processing, on them to make better decisions about the content that we receive on a daily basis. So we're not going to get into all of that, but let's go ahead and get started on using Gmail's API. The first thing you're going to need, of course, is a Gmail account. So I created this. As you can see, it's just a test email. My name is not John Smith, so sorry, Google. Now, the next thing you're going to need is a text editor. So I make use of Sublime Text. I find that it's just nice, nice keyword completions. There's like bindings for every language. You can open up projects on the side, and it's just simple and easy to use. The next thing you're going to need after that is your terminal window. If you are on a Windows machine, the commands are pretty much the same, and I recommend using PowerShell as opposed to the command prompt. If you're on Windows, again, do not use the command prompt. It sucks. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So you go into the Gmail API site here. So if you scroll down, click on Quick Start, and make sure that you're signed in here to the email that you want to use. So I'm using this test email again. So we're going to enable the Gmail API. Yes, next. It's going to take a minute or two. Shameless plug for Free Code Camp. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but they are the reason I learned how to program, basically. So check them out if you haven't. Now, this is where, we're going to download the client file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open up a Finder window. If you are on Windows, it would be File Explorer. So I'm going to say test API Gmail, and this is where we're going to do all our stuff. So I'm going to take, this. So I have it here. I'm just going to move this inside here. Rename that because Google's not going to like it if you add a 1. Okay, so that's been done. You want to go here and you want to copy this. Don't worry about the content for now, just go ahead and copy it. And then here you want to create a file called quickstart.py. So let's use Sublime Text. Pasting the contents. Whoops, that's the wrong language. So you want to do it in Python. Oh, here we go, Python. Okay. You want to make sure you have this, the pip, or sorry, the pip, I said the pip, the Google API client. So just copy paste this and then install. I already did this, so go ahead and do that if you haven't. So quickstart.py. Paste, save that inside test API. I'm going to call this quickstart.py. Okay, and then go into the folder it's in. What did I call this again? Test API Gmail. Right? Yeah. So Python quickstart.py. It's going to do a bunch of credential stuff. Oh no, that's not good. Shoot. You know what? It's because I enabled it from browser. Let's try that again. Enable the API. So let's download that again. I'm going to delete the old one. And this one. And delete this from my downloads. You don't need to worry about that. So credentials.json. All right. So we're good there. Copy this. Replace the content just in case something changed. I don't think anything changed in the quickstart.py file. I think it's just the credentials, if I'm not mistaken. But you never know. It only took a second. Now, let's see if I can move this. All right. Now let's do the same thing. Go here. Control C. Quickstart.py. And there we go. So John Smith, let's log in as him. And you want to hit advanced. Of course, the app isn't verified because you made it. So allow. Okay. So we should be good to go to get started. All right. So what I want to do now is I'm going to send myself a couple of test emails that we can work with. So what is this email? This is a test email for John. Okay, this is a test email for John. Testing. Test message 1. There we go. I'm going to send 2 more. Whoops. Ooh, I pasted the code in the oh, that's not good. Why don't I just delete this and start again? Test 2, test message 2. You know what, 2 should be enough for the purposes of this example. Now, so we got 2 emails that are unread. They're in our primary inbox. What we want to do is use the API to go in, gather information from these emails, and maybe print them out on the terminal. But we're going to write functions to do this so that we don't need to worry too much about this later on. So let's get started with that. Now, open up a new text editor. So Sublime Text. So basically, you want to do a couple of things. The first thing that you want to do is authenticate your application. So you need to have a function that does authentication. The next thing you want to do is create a service object, which is the API client object from Google, which is where you're going to make all of your calls. So the good thing is you can, for the authentication and stuff, a lot of that is already inside quickstart.py. So as you see here, we're going to copy this whole thing. So this is the authentication. It makes use of this, the scopes, right? And it makes use of all of these libraries, except for this one. I think, yeah, because this is a Python 2 thing. Hopefully you're using Python 3, by the way. But if you're using Python 2, just keep that there. Okay, you need pickle, all this crap. So let's start copying. We're gonna need this. Okay. Let's copy this whole thing, and then we can just remove what we don't need. So, okay, so I'm gonna call this get service, because what I'm gonna do is authenticate and return a service object, so that it's just one function to do both those things. Because you don't want to keep authenticating, then have a function to authenticate, then have a function to do the service, and then more and more steps. It's just easier this way. Now, forget this. So leave this intact, and then here they're just testing. They're calling it and testing it, whatever. All we're gonna do is say return service. Okay, this is the service object that we get from Google's API. Okay, here's where we're going to do all our calls. Now, we'll see what that looks like in a moment. Now, let's create some more interesting functions. Okay, so let's so we need to make a function to do this on Google. So subject test. It'll grab all of this stuff. So we want a function to do all of this. And Google's API is not very beginner friendly. So I'm going to write the code down and try to explain it as best as I can as we go through it. So the next function will be search messages. So search messages. It's going to take service, user ID, and a search string. Okay, so the first thing is it's going to take the service object and make a call to the API. So what Google recommends is to always have a try. I'm just going to populate this. One, accept, and then does stuff. This is, let me show you. So if you go here, and this is another part that's not right away apparent in Google's API, their documentation is like almost hidden in a way. So you gotta scroll down. So choosing out API user. Here we go. So it's in REST reference. So, I was in the wrong section. Okay. So you have to go here, and then here you have a bunch of user commands that you can use. So user history, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So usually at the bottom they have examples, but they don't always. So it's not very beginner friendly. Like a lot of these things you have to figure out on your own for the language you're using. Now, let's go ahead and create that search. So, oh, right, the whole point was I wanted to show you guys okay, so see, this is what I mean. Their documentation, and you'll find this, the documentation is not beginner friendly. So, you know what? I wrote the code before, so I'm just going to show you what I mean. You want to wrap it in a try, except to handle the error here. So we'll write this code and go through it step by step, but I just wanted this part here. Okay, accept errors, error. Okay, so we're gonna need a couple libraries. We're gonna need email, we're gonna need base64. The reason why we're gonna need, you'll see. So let's make a service call. So we do search message equals we'll call the search ID. Search ID equals service.users. This is what you usually do. You do users to go to the user's inbox, and then the next function is to do stuff. So you can do messages or things like list if you want to list labels. But this is the basic usage of their API. You got to create a service object, do a users to get to the user, and then the function that you want. So if it's list, it's going to take some parameters. We'll talk about them in a minute. And then after that, you have to make sure to hit execute. Okay? For us, what we want to do is we want to go to messages, and then we want to give it a ID. So user ID equals user ID. And for this, if you've authenticated this way, you can say, like when you're doing your testing on the terminal or whatever, you can say me, right? But if you're building this out for, let's say, a bunch of users, you'll need a user ID. So just keep that as user ID. We're going to give it a query, which is a search string. So this is the search string that we use up here, right? So subject test, or like in sent, etc., 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 right? So that's that. So what we're going to do is messages, user ID. You can add other options, but this is all we need, really. So execute that. It's going to give us back a payload. It's going to be a strange-looking dictionary type object. So why don't we go ahead and do this right in the terminal so that you can see what that looks like. So what we can do is I'm going to just take this, okay, and I like to use IPython. And if you haven't got IPython, I think it's pip install IPython. I don't think you can see that. Yeah, so what was it doing? Okay, IPython. Move this up a little. So I'm going to do a %paste, or you can say, because we're in the directory, from whatever you called this file, let's call it email stuff.py. So I'm going to do a %paste. Okay, now the service part is now here, and we're going to say service equals get service. Yeah, you have to import the libraries. Okay, so now we've got everything. Let's go service equals get service. Okay, now we get this object, Google API client object. So we can say search ID equals, etc., etc. And the reason why I'm bringing it into the terminal is because it's important to look at the return of, the object that you get back. Otherwise, the rest of the code is just going to look weird. User, So you got to give it options. So let's say subject, this is a test. So the same way we did it in Gmail. we're going to give it a user ID of me, and that should run fine. Okay. Okay, method resource got unexpected. Oh, did I type it wrong? User ID. Yeah, it's user underscore ID. My bad. So we're going to say user underscore ID. What? No, I had it right the first time. What is going on here? Okay. Ah, I forgot a function here. Dot list. So this is what I mean by it's not very beginner friendly. All of these methods here, they're not documented in a way that makes any sense in the documentation out here. So like, how would you have known to do that from this, right? Like, anyway, that's beside the point. Let's keep going. So now that we have this user ID, that should be okay. Let's try that again. Function object has no, shoot, my bad. You have to actually call the function or the method messages. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say user ID equals me, search string equals subject. This is a test. Okay. Search ID. That's not right. So I must have searched the wrong string. Ah, test. Not, this is a test. So go back to search string. We're just going to put in test. Search ID. Boom. We got only one of them, which is strange. Because see, when you search test here, it brings up both. And, you know, you can play around with this on your own system. Which strings work the best? I think they should work to gather them both. Okay, now it gets them both. That's weird. I thought that because they both start with the words test that it would capture it, but I guess not. So now, this isn't even the full message or the full payload. And it has to do with data structure and, you know, the way that Google pumps out information to their API users so that they don't overload their systems. Because when you search for something on their server, you don't always need everything. So I guess to Google's point, you know, if you don't need everything, why would they add more resources when they can just be optimized? So that means it's a little bit of extra work for us, but such is life. So let's keep going. So we've got an ID. So this is an ID for the email, okay? So if we go into search ID of messages, okay, we've got an ID and a thread ID. Thread ID, I'll be honest, I don't know what that is yet, but ID is the ID of the message that you want, okay? So going back to our function, we want to return all the IDs where the search string worked, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say message IDs equals search ID of messages. Okay, and Sometimes you'll get a result of 0, sometimes you'll get a result of 1 or 2. So that will happen before this, right? So if we go back to this example here, where we searched and we got a result estimate of 0, right? If we, let me rerun, you know what, let me store this variable just to show you. If we were to say J of messages, just like we did search ID of messages, it wouldn't work because there is no key of messages. So we want to make sure we catch that if there is a result of 0. So we can say search ID result estimate. Is it with an underscore? No, result size estimate. And we'll call this number results. Okay, and then we'll say if number results greater than 0, then we can go ahead and do some operations. So message IDs, search ID messages. Okay. So now we have, well, let me add the else clause just for completeness. Else, I'm going to print out there were 0 results for that search string, returning an empty string. Return this. Okay, so now we've got a dictionary containing our IDs, right? So message IDs equals search ID of messages. Message IDs, right? So we have all of these in a list. So we just want to grab this one and this one. Or if you had like 20, you just wanted to grab the first one, right? So we're going to say for ID in message IDs. Let's instantiate a list. So final list is this. ID and message IDs. So list dot, no, final list dot append. Right, you can't use ID because it's a keyword. IDs in message ID, IDs of ID, because it's a, dictionary object. Okay, so let's see what that looks like here. Well, you know what? I'm sure you guys know what that looks like. We're just looping through and just storing this in a list. So that's not why I'm doing that here. But it's important to have this terminal open because, as you can see, if you don't see the output, you won't be able to understand what's going on here. So that's good. Else print. Okay, so, and that's it. We just want the IDs, right? So loop through, and then when it's done, return the final list. Okay, so that's search messages. Now, here's where we actually grab the message using the ID. Let's create another function. Get define get message. Again, give it a service, user ID. Doesn't need a search string. So let's go ahead and, again, wrap that around a try except, just to make sure if the API didn't run, we covered our asses. So, all right, go ahead with a try. So we're going to be given a user ID and the service. So message list equals, it's going to be the same thing as this, service, users, messages, etc. So I'm going to use this code, user ID. We don't need a search string. Let me see. So we're going to say ID equals message ID. Oh, right, we do need a message here. And then we're going to give it format equals raw. This is important. We want it to be in a byte format, and we're going to take the message and encode it, or sorry, decode it ourselves. Otherwise, this doesn't work, and you won't be able to access the raw messages. Okay, so we have our message list. So again, let's see how this looks in the terminal. So we're going to need a service, user ID. User ID is the same. And then message ID is going to be those two things, right? So why don't we just take this first one just to sort of look at what it looks like. So we're going to say message ID equals this. Okay. Now let's paste. Oops. Let's see what this looks like here. Got an unexpected ID. I must have used the wrong parameter again. Let me just double check. Messages.get. Okay, I used the wrong function. Sorry about that. So it's not a list, it's a get this time. ID is message ID is there. We got our user ID set up, format is raw. There we go. Let's take a look at what this is. Ah, lovely. This is so readable, right? So basically what we want to do is take the message that is completely non-human readable right now and convert it into something that we can work with. So the way we do that is with the base64 package. So we're going to be making use of this message raw, the byte format of the message. So why don't we write a line here? So we're going to call it message raw equals base64 dot URL safe b64 code, and then we're going to say message raw, and we need to encode it. ASCII works pretty well here. I tried UTF-8, that also works, but inside the documentation of Google, they recommend to use ASCII. And just in case you're wondering, the section in the documentation is get mime message. I would, if I were you, I would Google get mime message Gmail API, but since I was already there, Google knew to display this to me. Mime message. Okay, so this is one of the few sections in their API documentation where there's actually like a full function you can use. So it's this right here. This is what we're using. So this is the code that we're using right now. You know, I didn't know this by heart, but basically we take the message in raw format, encode it in ASCII, and then use this base64 package to take the URL and decode it. Then we get this string object, right? So let's take a look at what this looks like. So going back to our code, message raw. Let's just call this message. I already called it. Okay, let's just say message equals message list. Just to make it easy. But you know what? Before we do that, why don't we just run the part where we decode this raw text in ASCII, so we can take a look at what this looks like. Encode ASCII. It still means nothing, right? Like it didn't really change much, to the human eye, or at least at all. I know that the system knows that this is now an ASCII text, but nothing really changed here. But if we actually copy this whole thing, let's see what that looks like. Aha! Now we've got some content that looks a little more readable. Like we can see John Smith. This is a test, so the user email here, content type, blah, 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 right? So we've got some stuff to work with, which is great. So why don't we, we already did that. We stored it in an array. So now we're gonna get this and actually turn it from a byte object, which is what it is right now. It's a byte object, and turn it into something that is a string that we can work with. So I do that again. Right, so you say message string equal email dot email message from byte. Is it byte or bytes? Bytes. Okay, bytes. And then message string. Show me what that looks like. Oh, whoops. Message raw. Oh, not bad. So message raw, good. Message string, message string. Okay, now we have an email object, right? It's now in a byte format. So, my apology, this isn't byte format. This is now byte format. This is still a ASCII text. So, or is that, what was I write? Encoding makes my head hurt, guys. It's one of those things where the concept is simple, but the way things move around and get encoded and decoded and move from bytes to other things just honestly makes my head spin. So let's just keep it going. So now we have this message string object, and it has a couple of, let's see if actually IPython, it has a couple of methods that we can use, that we will use. So we want to get the content main type. So where is it? So this function here, let's read out the documentation because this is important. Email get content main type. Is this it? Yeah, get content Okay, so the way they break it down is there's main type and subtype. Okay, so main type, so unless the text is plain, hold on, find the big text plain unless it appears inside a multi-part digest container. It'll get broken down into multi-part if your email body is written in HTML. So if it has an HTML component, so or like markup elements to it, so like bold text or I don't know, a big heading or like an image that is embedded or whatever, it'll get put into a multi-part. I don't know if Gmail by default has two types, if it's going to give it a multi-part by default, but let's find out. Okay, so get content main type multi-part. So I guess Gmail does do that. So Gmail messages by default are not plain text. So good to know. So because it's multi-part, what we need is to look at the payload. So message string.get payload. Okay, so now we've got two parts. This first part is going to be plain text. Second part is going to be HTML. And let me show you what that looks like. So first of all, let's add that to our code here. So content types equals message string dot get content main types. And say if content types equals multi-part, do stuff, else do other stuff. Let's define that stuff. So now we're gonna be working inside this loop, but here just to demonstrate what that looks like. So let's store this inside a parts variable, and then we can say, just to show you, content1, content2 equals parts. So content1, get the payload of that, get payload. Boom. There's the message. Content2.get payload. Oops. And there's the HTML message. So you see we get a two-part message. We'll get the plain text. /r is return line. /n is new line, which is confusing because they both pretty much do the same thing. I think this is more of like a carriage return, like pushing enter. But then again, new line is also sort of like pushing enter. I think this is just the older way of doing it. But whatever. If we print it out, well, there's nothing under it, so it's just gonna. Well, let's see what happens. So print. Okay, you see, it did two new line characters. So you'll find that your text is going to come in this way. You're going to see carriage returns and new line elements to it. So why don't we add this what we learned here inside here. So again, you get the payload. It gives you two messages. Inside those messages, because they're email messages, you get the payload of that, and that gives you the actual message that you need. So let's extend that here. You know what? I'm going to do. Screen is not big enough. Okay, let's do. Oops. Let's do the stuff. So let's say part 1, part 2 equals message string dot get payload. The icon here. Part one is raw. Plain, raw is the wrong word. Let's be careful of our words here. Plain text. Part 2 is HTML text. Okay. So what we want to do is return part 1 dot get payload. Right? Because when we do that, this is the message body. So that's that. Else, I think if it's, oh, right, there's two types of multi-part. If it's not multi-part, then we return message, return, can't English anymore, message, string dot get payload. Okay, and that should pretty much cover it. If you want to do some more stuff like printing or adding it to a file, you can do all that. But that's a very basic beginner's guide on using the Gmail API end to end to go in to a user's inbox, grab the message based on a search, and display it on the screen, or return it to a function. So we just do this: print. This is the message body. Print part1 dot get payload. That should be good. So let's make sure that this function works in our terminal, and then we're pretty much done. Just paste. Oops. You know what? It's because Sublime Text will. Oh, that's annoying. So we got to do. Make sure that the tabs are aligned. And you see how it's like dashed like this? Sometimes it's like little dots, and that lets you know that this is a tab and these are spaces. And Python's very finicky with this stuff, so you just got to make sure that everything is tabbed right, and everything is tidy, or that everything is tabbed with spaces, which can be the cause of a lot of headaches, in my opinion. So I digress. Let's do a paste. Invalid syntax. Why? You know what? I was getting this error even before, so everything needs to be spaces. Anyway, sorry for the ghetto video, but hopefully this gives you an insight into how to do this kind of thing. You can play around with this. This function will work as long as you have all the indents right on your side. And basically, that's how it's done. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.